One of the highest honors that any designer can achieve is to create something that is timeless and iconic. We all want to make something that leaves a lasting impression on our users and on culture as a whole. This is going to be a multi-part series, and this first video is about what makes a design iconic, what makes a design a meme, and what makes a design distinctive but not really breaking new ground. To start, let's talk about what icon means according to the dictionary definition. It is a person or thing regarded as a representative symbol or as worthy of veneration. The word iconic was typically reserved for religious contexts. In Western culture, the Christian cross is probably the best example of an iconic form, which brings forth another point. Icons are very dependent on culture. What is iconic in one culture might be totally meaningless in another one, and you need to be sensitive to that when you're designing. In modern contexts, especially in design, this isn't really how we use the word. I think that a more relevant definition for iconic is that it's recognizable, memorable, and it sets a new standard for others to follow. It's symbolic of a larger movement within culture. So let's look at an iconic idea outside of industrial design. To be iconic, you often have to look outside of your field and rethink things. So that's what we're going to do with this video as we go through this analysis. Let's look at this famous quote by John F. Kennedy and see how we might relate it back to principles of iconic industrial design. You'll see that a lot of the same principles apply no matter what the medium.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
This quote is about 60 years old, and it's still one of the most famous quotes in US history. So, why is this quote iconic? Well, first of all, it's simple and easy to understand. Almost every single word is one syllable, except for country, which is only 2 syllables. The sentence structure is at an elementary school level. Anyone can understand this. This helps to make it recognizable and memorable. While the sentence structure is presented simply, it speaks to a greater truth that is admirable. Contribute to the public good. It sets a new standard. Being virtuous and helping others is an idea as old as time, but so many other presidents just pander to what's in it for their citizens. Elected presidents almost never ask citizens to sacrifice or contribute to a larger vision, especially in peacetime, but JFK did exactly that with this quote. This quote has also stood the test of time. It was first uttered in 1961, yet here we are still talking about it. One interesting thing is that immediately after stating this quote, he says almost the exact same thing again. Listen here.
My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man.
He does this because he wants to drive the point home. This amplifies the quote's impact, and it helps us to remember it even more, therefore making it even more recognizable. Now, you can easily start to see how an analysis of this iconic quote can be applied to your design work. Once again, it's important to think about how to connect contrasting ideas when creating iconic designs. You can't look within your current field of study, you need to look outside of it. Let's take this criteria that we just made from the JFK quote and see if it applies to the iPod, one of the most iconic designs of the 21st century. So just like the JFK quote, it's simple. Both the interface and the visual design is iconic in how simple it is. One good test of whether a visual design is iconic is to see if you can draw it with just a few quick lines. It also speaks to a greater truth or trend. Now, back in the early 2000s, the music industry was freaking out because of the illegal distribution and downloading of music files through things like Napster, LimeWire, etc. Now, rather than try to fight the inevitable move towards digital music, Apple's iPod and iTunes embraced the new paradigm and took full advantage of it. As a result, Apple sold millions of iPods and cemented themselves as the leader in the digital music industry. It sets a new standard. Both from an aesthetic design perspective and a usability perspective, it completely changed the way we interact with music. Look at these other MP3 players and then look at the iPod. These MP3 players have this very blobby 90s sort of look, and then the iPod is this super streamlined, very minimalist design. Better yet, look at this portable CD player, and then look at the iPod. That is a stark contrast. On a functional level, you have access to an entire discography in your pocket, all with a very clever and compact interface. The iPod, without a doubt, has stood the test of time. While it is obsolete at this point from a technology perspective, its legacy around design and usability is still as strong as ever. All of society has shifted towards listening to digital music on tiny, minimalist metal rectangles, and it's been that way for 20 years now. And lastly, iPod ads were plastered all over billboards, TV ads, and just about everywhere else. Apple's massive marketing push helped to make the exceptional product memorable. I don't want to downplay the importance of good marketing when it comes to creating an iconic product either. You need eyes on your product if you want it to become iconic. This is largely because of the mere exposure effect. Basically, this is a psychological phenomenon where people develop a preference towards something just because they're exposed to it over and over again. This is why pop radio stations play the same songs constantly. Even if you don't like it at first, and even if the music is actually not that good, eventually you will develop a taste for it. The same is the case for physical products. The more you're exposed to a product or design, the more you're going to like it. This is one major reason why the iPod is famous, whereas Dieter Rams' T3 radio is very obscure, even though the designs are incredibly similar in terms of looks. Now, to be fair, of course, the T3 radio is not nearly as groundbreaking in terms of its functionality. Another great example of an iconic design is the classic Mini car. Once again, it's simple. You can easily draw the front fascia with just a few simple geometric shapes. It speaks to the greater trend of moving towards practical, compact automobiles that had great fuel economy and ample storage, a trend that is as relevant as ever, even today. It's a fresh perspective that is in stark contrast to the giant American cars of the 1950s. Lastly, it has stood the test of time. The original Mini is one of the most well-known car designs ever, and the brand lives on in modern iterations as well. Interestingly, a lot of the emojis in your phone represent iconic designs. I guess it's not really that surprising that iconic designs turn into phone or desktop icons. Emojis need to be recognizable, even as very small, simplified images. The electric guitar emoji is modeled after the Fender Stratocaster, which might be one of the most iconic musical instruments of the 20th century. The Fender Stratocaster and its predecessors, like the Telecaster, helped to transform the role of guitar from a support instrument to a lead or solo instrument. This was largely due to the transition from acoustic instruments to electromagnetic pickups, or the electric guitar. Jimi Hendrix, a cultural icon in his own right, showed the world what could be done with the Fender Stratocaster. The Fender Strat, the iPod, and the Mini all look beyond existing conventions or ideas and change the game, and that's what makes them iconic. Most iconic products come about as a direct result of a new paradigm in technology or manufacturing. So the Fender Strat, for example, would not have been possible without streamlined assembly processes and, like I said before, the electromagnetic pickups. The relatively small size of the iPod was thought to be impossible until an Apple executive coincidentally found an electronics manufacturer who was making a tiny hard drive with massive storage capacity. Without that tiny little hard drive, the iPod would not have comfortably fit in your pocket, and that iconic form factor might not have been possible. The size and performance of the Mini Cooper car would not have been possible if they hadn't completely reworked the positioning of key components. This innovative component arrangement is still used as a blueprint for modern compact cars, even today. Once again, iconic designs are as much about good engineering as they are about good design. I think this highlights an important point, because it makes it clear that in order to create an iconic design, it goes way beyond the design. You need that marketing budget, and you need that great engineering team to make things happen. Now, to be fair, not all iconic designs need to use a new technology, but they definitely need to break new ground. The Juicy Salif is arguably an iconic design, but it's more because of what it represents. It forces us to think about the primary function of an object in our lives and to reprioritize joy as a function rather than pure functional utility. Now, I don't know whether it's a good or bad idea to design something that is functionally useless. But that's not really the point. The point is that the Juicy Salif forces us to confront that question in a very direct way. Okay, so we've covered some iconic designs. I also think it's important to talk about what is not iconic. The word iconic is thrown around a lot in design circles, and I feel like it's overused. I think there are other designs out there that are great, even exceptional. I just don't think they're worthy of the word iconic. So for example, I think that a lot of products fall under the category of meme rather than iconic. Now to be clear, the word meme doesn't just have to be about cat jokes on the internet. A meme by definition is just a way of compressing a complex issue, narrative, or emotion into a simple image or design. Almost all memes these days are distributed over the internet, to be fair, but you can use the word to talk about products too. These kinds of meme products offer a certain shock value and generate a lot of polarizing opinions. Their main issue is that they're just different for the sake of being different more often than not. To be clear, I don't think this is a bad thing necessarily. I actually think it's good to shake things up on a purely visual level. If one of my designs ever becomes a meme, I personally would consider that a huge success. The only issue with meme designs is that they don't really speak to any sort of greater truth. The Cybertruck is a good example of this. So the Cybertruck, at least to me, is more of a meme than an icon. Sure, it's simple, very simple. It sets a new standard in many ways in terms of the lower cost exoskeleton construction. It's hard to say for sure whether it's going to be an icon or not until looking back on it several years later. But with the Cybertruck, I think the bigger issue is that it isn't representative of any greater truth or trend. It's just sort of a boxy looking rectangle car, but beyond that, it doesn't really represent anything new or different. To me, it's more of a physical expression of Elon Musk's insanity more than anything else. It's also worth mentioning that there are other angular wedge-shaped cars that I think are better executed and closer to being iconic. It's just that they didn't have the marketing budget behind them to really turn them into cultural icons. This Lancia Stratos HF0 is probably an icon among people who are passionate about cars though. And the overall aesthetic is sort of in the vein of the Cybertruck, just way better executed. Lastly, I think that products can simply be distinctive. I think that this is a good thing. Sure, a distinctive design might not be breaking new ground, but it's a lot better than being boring or not useful or bad. And I think the Ford Bronco is an excellent example of this. It's a well-proportioned, well-executed design that's probably going to sell really well. It has design elements that are very distinctive, but it isn't iconic, and we probably won't be talking about it in 5 years, for example. So in summary, in order for a design to be iconic, it must be memorable and recognizable. It should speak to a greater truth and set a new standard for its category. The word iconic should only be reserved for the most successful designs. It's something that comes along once every few years. If we start calling everything iconic, then there's no word to describe something that truly changes the world, like the iPod. It's better to use more modest terms. In the next video, we're going to talk about how to create designs that are iconic, or at the very least, very distinctive. It's going to be a lot of fun, so stay tuned for that. Anyway, thanks for checking this out, guys. Don't forget to subscribe, and I hope you learned something.